Good day everyone, I am Jaira Trixie Marie Bartolo from BEd1, and in this video I am going to tackle about the revised Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. Um, ang akong kauban ani nga report is si Bichette Joven, which his task is to do the PowerPoint while I do the explanation, the readings. So, okay, let's talk about the old taxonomy. In 1995, the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the Classification of Educational Goals Handbook 1, Cognitive Domain was published. Initially, the purpose was simply to have a framework to classify test questions that faculty members assured. Eventually, it became so relevant and useful in education. Since then, it has been used in planning the curriculum, planning learning activities and assessment. Bloom and his colleagues published Handbook 2, Defective Domain in 1964. Eventually, other experts published a taxonomy for the psychomotor domain in 1966, 1970, and 1972. So, what is taxonomy? So, diba, taxonomy is the science of naming, describing, and classifying organisms, and includes all plants, animals, and microorganisms of the world. And so, Bloom's taxonomy was developed to provide a common language for teachers to discuss and exchange learning and assessment methods. So, mano siya nga, nakastate diri nga, it became so relevant and useful in education. So, now let's proceed. Bloom's taxonomy was a model that described the different levels of learning outcomes that target what skills and competencies that teachers aim to develop in learners. The taxonomy in the cognitive domain contains the levels from knowledge to evaluation. The 6 levels progress from simple to more complex levels of thinking, the last 3 being referred to as higher order thinking skills or HOTS. So you've got to have HOTS to teach well. We always hear seasoned teachers reminding us to focus on the HOTS or HOTS and not just stop at the usual memorizing and enumerating. So as what I have said earlier, taxonomies in education is very useful and relevant. It classifies systems based on an organizational scheme. Also, it is set of carefully defined terms, organized from simple to complex and form concrete to abstract. And so also it provide a framework of categories into which one may classify educational goals. So the goal of Bloom's taxonomy is to encourage a higher order thought in their students by building up from lower level cognitive skills. Behavioral and cognitive learning outcomes are given to highlight how Bloom's taxonomy can be incorporated into larger scale educational goals or guidelines. So, diri na puti ginatawag nga HOTS or HOTS, which is being referred to as higher order thinking skills. It is the cognitive processes that require thinking at a more complex, higher level. High potential learners often master the lower order tasks very quickly and need to think more deeply about the topics. So this HOTS or the higher order thinking skills is encouraged by teachers because for them it is one of the most effective ways for learners to catch up with the topic and to learn further and to learn easily. Now let's proceed. To facilitate learning, we begin teaching with facts. stating memorized rules, principles, or definitions or knowledge, which must lead to understanding concept, rules, and principles, comprehension. But we should not end here. A proof of the comprehension of the concepts and principles is using them in real life situation application. For an in-depth understanding and masteries of these applied concepts, rules, and principles, these are broken down into parts, which is the analysis. Students may compare, contrast, classify, further investigate, etc. These actions now reflect a higher level of thinking. A still higher level of thinking is when students put together elements of what has been learned in a new way, sentences. They come up with a holistic, complete, more integrated, or even a new view of perspective of what was learned. With a full grasp of what was learned, the students can now assess or judge based on a set of standards on what they have learned. The evaluation. So, kung mapansin ninyo, murag natay makita nga open o close parentheses nga medyo naka-bold ang ang text. So, those are the 6 levels to promote higher order thinking. The knowledge, which um, begin with facts, stating memorized rules, principles, or definition. That's the knowledge. And the second one is the rules and principle, the comprehension, the concepts of rules and principles. The third one is when using them in a real life situation. It's the application. The analysis naman are these are broken down into parts. And the synthesis, what has been learned in a new way, while the evaluation is on how they assess situations and or what have they learned. Okay, so let's get to learn further about the six levels to promote higher order thinking. So here are some examples of learning outcomes using the taxonomy. Bloom's cognitive domains. Bloom's cognitive taxonomy originally was represented by 6 different domain levels. So those are nga the knowledge, the comprehension, the application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So first, let us talk about the knowledge. So knowledge: define, describe, draw, identify, label, locate, memorize, name, recite, recognize, select, state, and write. So the second one is this comprehension. Comprehension is defined as the ability to grasp the meaning of material. This may be shown by translating material from one form to another, words or numbers, by interpreting material, explaining or summarizing, and by estimating future trends, predicting consequences or effects. So the third one is the application. Application refers to the ability to use learned material in new and concrete situations. This may include application of such things as rules, methods, concepts, principles, laws, and theories. Learning outcome in this area require a higher level of understanding than those of comprehension. The fourth one is the analysis. The analysis level is where students use their own judgment to begin analyzing the knowledge they have learned. At this point, they begin understanding the underlying structure to knowledge and also are able to distinguish between fact and opinion. So, The top three levels of Bloom taxonomy, which is often displayed as a pyramid with ascending levels of thinking at the top of the structures, are conjugate analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So this analysis is the fourth level of Bloom's pyramid. It involves students use their own judgment to begin analyzing the knowledge they have learned. Um, Analyzing each statement to decide whether it is fact or opinion. Like for example, illustrate the differences between the American alligator and the Nile crocodile. So another example is kanang um, compare and contrast different beliefs, mga different animals, mga ingana. So the fifth one is a synthesis. Um, it occurs when learners go beyond what they have learned, understand, applied, and analyze to create a product or develop a new method. Building, developing, formulating, and inventing plans and ideas are all part of the process. So synthesis, the fifth level of Bloom's taxonomy pyramid, it requires students to infer relationship among sources, such as essays, articles, works of fiction, lectures by instructors, and even personal observations. An example is when a student might infer a relationship between what she has read in the newspaper or article and what she has observed herself. Like the high level thinking of sentences is evident when students put the parts or information they have reviewed together to create new meaning or a new structure. So at the synthesis level SAD, students move beyond relying on previously learned information or analyzing items that the teacher is giving to them. Some questions in the educational setting that would involve the synthesis level of high order thinking skill might include what alternative would you suggest for, or what changes you would make to revise, or what could you invent to solve. So let's proceed to the sixth. Evaluation. The highest level of thinking and was thought to require the most complex mental processes. At this level, learners are expected to make judgments about the value of the methods or materials presented to them. So evaluation, the top level of Bloom's taxonomy, it involves students making judgments about the value of ideas, items, and materials. Evaluation is the top level of Bloom's taxonomy pyramids. So because at this level that students are expected to kanang mentally assemble all they have learned to make informed and sound evaluation of the material. So let's proceed. So, revised taxonomy. After 45 years since the publication of Bloom's taxonomy, Lauren Anderson, Bloom's former student, and David Crathwell led a new group of experts to work together. The result was what is now called the revised taxonomy. So, what is this revised taxonomy? Revised taxonomy refers to the emphasis on two learning domains that make up educational objectives: the cognitive knowledge and affective attitude. The revised taxonomy focuses on 6 levels. One is the remember, understand, pinaka-bottom is the remember. In a pyramid, ang nasa pinaka-bottom is the remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So, unlike the 1956 version, This revised taxonomy differentiates between knowing what, the content of thinking, and knowing how, the procedures used in solving problems. Okay, so now let's talk about the salient differences between the old and the revised taxonomies. So, number one, levels or categories of thinking in the old taxonomy were nouns, while in the revised taxonomy they are verbs. The use of action words instead of nouns was done to highlight that thinking is not, is an active process. For example, evaluate instead of evaluation, or analyze instead of analysis. So, so another difference between the old and revised taxonomies is that while the revised taxonomy remains to be hierarchical levels of increasing complexity, it is intended to be more flexible, and that is allows the categories to overlap. For example, some action words in understand level, like explain, may appear to be more complex than the action word show in the apply level. However, when we look into the six levels form remember to create, we will still find that overall, the taxonomy proceeds in the hierarchical order. So the third one is another difference is the knowledge level was changed to remember. The change was made because knowledge does not refer to a cognitive or thinking level. Knowledge is the object of the thinking. Remember is a more appropriate word for the first thinking level, which involves recalling and retrieving knowledge. Also, the comprehension level was changed to understand. Teachers are likely to use the word understand when referring to their work rather than comprehension. Synthesis was changed to create and was placed as the highest level. The co- sorry. The cognitive domain now includes two dimensions, the cognitive dimension and the knowledge dimension, which I mentioned earlier. So then the knowledge dimension of the revised taxonomy was based on the subcategories of knowledge in the old taxonomy. The revived taxonomy with two dimensions of the cognitive domain, Cradwell 2002. The cognitive dimension. So, as what I have mentioned earlier, there are six levels. So, cognitive dimension involves the processing of information, applying knowledge, and changing preferences. In relation to education, cognitive dimension is that it deals with knowledge. So these are the cognitive process dimensions or the hierarchical order of the cognitive process dimensions of the revised taxonomy. So number one is remember, retrieving relevant knowledge from long-term memory. And an example is the recognizing and the recalling. Number two, determining understand, determining the meaning of instructional messages, including oral, written, and graphic communication. Interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, and explaining. Number three is apply. Apply is carrying out or using a procedure in a given situation. These are executing and implementing. The fourth one is to analyze. It is breaking material into its constituent parts and detecting how the parts relate to one another and to an overall structure of purpose, like to differentiate or differentiating, organizing, and attributing. So the fifth one is to evaluate. Evaluate Evaluating means making judgments based on a criteria and the standards like critiquing, and checking. So the last one, I think, yeah, the last one is to create. Creating means putting elements together to form a novel, coherent whole, or make an original product, like magama, to generate, to plan, and to produce. So let's proceed na pod sa knowledge. So the knowledge dimension. So the knowledge dimension is the knowing what. It has four categories. Categories. It's the but I always remember nga the knowledge. Ang knowledge dimension in taxonomy is always knowing what. So these are the four categories. Number one is factual, the basic elements that students must know, knowledge of terminology, and specific details and elements. Number two is a conceptual. Conceptual is the interrelationship among the basic elements within a larger structure that enable them to function together. Knowledge of one is classification and categories, principles and generalization, theories, models, and structures. The next one is the procedural knowledge. It is how to do something, methods of inquiry, and criteria for using skills, algorithms, techniques, and methods. Knowledge of A is the subject specific skills and algorithms, subject specific techniques and methods, criteria for determining when to use appropriate procedures. The next one is the metacognitive knowledge. Metacognitive knowledge, or the knowledge of cognition in general, as well as awareness and knowledge of one's own cognition. It is the strategic knowledge, knowledge about cognitive skill, including contextual and conditional knowledge, and self-knowledge. So let's proceed to the next slide. Okay. So the revised taxonomy highlights two dimensions, the cognitive and the knowledge dimensions. The cognitive dimensions include the hierarchical or ordered levels of thinking. The thinking levels move from the simplest form to the most complex. The levels are remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And so, sa knowledge side, the knowledge dimensions includes four knowledge categories: the factual, the conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. The knowledge that teachers aim to teach and students aim to learn can be about facts, concepts, procedures, and metacognitive knowledge. So, mausad ni ang akong giyaw-yaw kaganina the four categories of the knowledge dimension that includes isolated bits of information such as vocabulary, definitions, and knowledge about specific details. So let's proceed to the next slide. So when you formulate learning objectives, the level of thinking is represented by the verb, while the knowledge dimension is represented by the noun. In the example, at the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to explain the photosynthesis process. Explain is the action word which will fall under the second cognitive dimensions level. Understand and photosynthesis is the noun that will fall under the procedural knowledge. So, when creating learning objectives, the verbs represent the degree of thinking, while the noun represents the knowledge aspects. So, at the end of the session, at the end of the learners is expected to to be able to for the given example, nga ma-explain na niya the the learner is expected nga ma-explain na niya the photosynthesis process, where explain is an action word that falls under the second cognitive dimension level, understand, and the photosynthesis, as what stated here, is a noun that falls under a procedural knowledge. So here's a practical guide in using the revised taxonomy. When you are ready to plan your units, lesson, or activities, Bloom's taxonomy will be very useful in helping you formulate your learning objectives. So, diba, the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy emphasizes students' learning outcomes through the use of refined terms. So, since this taxonomy helps teachers make decisions about the classification of content, the use of Bloom's taxonomy also helps teachers map content to tasks that students need to perform. And so yeah, Bloom's taxonomy can be applied in doing lesson plan, assessments. Many teachers write their assessments in the lowest two levels of the taxonomy actually. These are based on what I have researched. Now let's talk about the uses of the revised taxonomy. So the revised taxonomy provides a framework that helps educators in the following ways. One, it provides educators with a common set of terms and levels about learning outcomes that help in planning across subject matter and grade levels. Two, it helps in the drafting of learning standard across levels. Three, it serves as a guide in evaluating the school's curriculum objectives, activities, and assessments. The last one is number four. It guides the teachers in formulating learning outcomes that tap higher order thinking skills. And yeah, I think that's all for our report. Thank you.